Jesus, a novel by Terry Esau. Chapter 2, Screaming Skin. The orange neon sign above the bar flickered. I looked up to see the words I had read dozens of times by now, mender of broken hearts. It seemed fitting since Susie had retrofitted an old church that had gone belly up, turning it into her place of worship. They say nature abhors a vacuum. Well, Susie couldn't resist the oxymoronic opportunity to swap soul searchers for thirst quenchers, not to mention that she couldn't stand to see the funky Gothic architecture go to waste. She spit, polished, and shined the quaint sanctuary for months, transforming it into her neon cathedral. Pews, pulpits, and stained glass windows, they all added to the appeal of a place that encouraged the numbing of pain however it could be achieved. She put drinks in the hands of the sacred statues and added cup holders to the kneeling benches. She flaunted her irreverence, often from behind the pulpit, which now served as the DJ station. She would take her perch behind the pulpit like clergy and testify. For the next half hour, Jim Beam has offered to wash your sins away for only $2 a shot. Step right up. I'm selling cheap fucking salvation, people, often making even the most irreligious squirm. She really wasn't a bad person, more of an affable rabble-rouser whose mouth worked bluer than her mind. I always suspected it was 2 shots marketing mixed with a thin splash of sincerity. I threw down the last gulp of my beer, dropped $1 on the bar, and turned to walk out. I figured I had given Jesus a 45-second head start. I didn't want to look like one of his groupies. God knows there were enough of those pathetic people already. Either they were Klingons or just rubberneckers waiting for the crash. And there were plenty of crashes wherever he seemed to go. I've never seen trouble shadow someone like this Jesus. It's not like he was looking for it or even asking for it, but it seemed to be lurking around every corner. In the short 2 months since arriving in Minneapolis, he had already developed a fairly lengthy list of enemies. Interestingly, it was always the religious, wealthy, or powerful who were cross-grained with him. It's funny how polarizing he seemed to be. You would expect that from someone who was cocky and brash, but Jesus was neither. He was quite humble, while in a confident sort of way. I did hear him call this rich dude a poseur, complete with a French accent. But in this case, Jesus was totally right. The guy was a phony asshole. As I walked out of the bar, I saw Jesus about a block away, flanked by James and John. It looked like they were trying to have a discussion, but were struggling because of the posse hive that was hovering and circling. I feel kind of bad saying this, but it almost seems like the losers were drawn to Jesus. There weren't a lot of JE2US in the crowd, not many Ivy Leaguers. Maybe that's another reason why I was trying to keep my distance. I know I'm not the picture of success. I mean, my only transportation is a 30-year-old Schwinn varsity bicycle with a full spectrum of scratches. But I did get into med school, and someday I will be a doctor, and hell, listen to me, talking myself into the fact that I'm somebody. My name is Philip. I'm a 3rd-year med student at the University of Minnesota. I've got no girlfriend. I live in a shitty apartment with 2 other guys. I work as a bike messenger a few days a week just to put coin in my pocket, drinking money mostly. My parents barely have enough for themselves, so I'm basically living on loans and will probably be reimbursing the bank well into my 1,000th vasectomy. I slid on my backpack, clipped into the pedals, and started casually riding toward the Jesus scene. They stopped in front of a place called Screamin, a tattoo parlor run by a 6'4" black man with biceps as big as my thighs, a beast of a man named Pete. I'd seen him around, He liked the neon cathedral as much as me. He wasn't the kind of guy you'd catch me hanging out with, scary looking with full sleeve tattoos depicting violent scenes with guns, skulls, and naked women. He generally wore a wife beater to show off his artwork, but then don't all inkaholics go sleeveless or shirtless? I actually went into Pete's place 6 months ago and asked about getting a tattoo. I was the only bike messenger in our company that didn't have one, so I thought I'd get something, anything, but small, on my calf. I didn't want a job stopper, just something to help me fit in. I told Pete I had $20 and asked what he could do for that. He told me for $20 he'd laugh my ass right out of his shop. I had turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm with his huge hand and said, "Come here, little buddy." Sitting me down in his chair, he asked me a few questions, then fired up his gun. He did this very cool illustration of a bicycle chain ring that had a heart in the middle. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but it wasn't. In fact, it was the talk of all my bike messenger buddies for a long time after that. When Pete had finished, I sheepishly pulled out my $20 bill and offered it to him. He said, "This one's on the house. The next one I'm charging you double. Now get out of here." I waved at Pete a couple of times when I saw him at Susie's, but had never gotten up the courage to actually talk to him. So now I see Jesus with James and John walking into Screamin' Skin. I had to see this for myself. Was Jesus going to get inked? Was he going to ask Pete to join his tribe? Were they going to start a band? I rolled up to the front of the shop, weaving my way between people till I was just outside the front window. I could see them talking inside and had to know what was going on. This was so not like me, but I leaned my bike against the window and walked inside. It was a tiny place, so there was no hiding once you walked in the door. "Hey kid, you back for more? Did you bring money this time?" Pete asked with a grin that wasn't kidding. Jesus and the brothers turned to look at me. I turned to leave, realizing this had been a mistake. That's when I heard Jesus say, That's what I want on my arm." I turned and saw him pointing at my calf. "The chain ring with the heart?" asked Pete. "Yeah, but instead of a chain ring, can you make it a globe? You know, the earth from 20,000 miles. Pete fired up his gun and told me I'd have to pose with my calf while he started slinging ink. His iron touched Jesus' skin for the first time, and the faint vapor arose from the gun, along with the aroma of burning flesh. I stood there for 2 hours while Jesus got a tattoo. James and John said nothing. I wondered if this was fodder for some twisted song they would compose down the road. You know, something like, "I can smell the skin of Jesus burning. Come, revolution, come. Beating on a world that's turning. Come, revolution, come. It's time for the tribe to bust the man. Bust the man. I can smell the skin of Jesus burning." I could almost hear the dirty guitars and their Irish angst in my head. During those hours, I listened to some of the most interesting dialogue I have ever witnessed. Just like everyone else, Pete had been hearing things about this Jesus and was curious to dig in. And Pete was not a shy sort, pretty much the opposite of me. No fear, no filter. If he thought it, he asked it. "So I hear you're the big fucking new man in town," nodding toward the crowd outside his window. "What's your story, Mr. Jesus?" Jesus smiled and said, "I'm here to love you, Peter." Peter jerked the iron away from Jesus' arm, waiting for further clarification. "I'm here to show you what love looks like." Jesus nodded toward his arm as if to say, "It's okay, you can go back to work now." Peter tentatively brought the gun back to Jesus' skin. Love has become contractual, conditional. It's so self-serving, choking on its own passions. It has become watered down, weak, impotent. I'm here to put love back in the fire and burn off the excess to only what's true remains. We never intended for it to be this way. Pete looked up at Jesus. Who's we? You got an alien in your pocket? Let me tell you a story that I think will help you understand. Once upon a time in the land of religion, there lived an old gnome who had no home, so he slept on the steps of cathedrals and chapels and ate out of trash cans in shadows of steeples. Till one day he ventured inside the grand doors where gnomes are not welcome, at least not by people. He walked down the aisle to whispers and chatter and critics who spattered. Who let in this dust? He might land on our sills and mess up our marble and statues and tills. The looks of disgust were plastered in places of pious and holy and reverent faces. But the gnome kept on walking like it was his wedding, methodically marching, melodically swaying, left, right, heel, toe. Straight to the altar, past elders and teachers, 3 creaky stairs, and on up to the preacher. He turned to the crowd and was stunned to be seeing 1,000 white faces, all dead in their places for weeks or months, not even a whisper, no breathing in the body, just cold, empty spaces. The gnome cleared his throat and took a deep breath and sang out this ditty to all who would hear, to search for the life in these statues to fear. I'm not very handsome, I'm not all that friendly, I scare little children and no one befriends me. I'm not a good prospect for filling your coffers, but I have something more crucial to offer. In the nick of time, before it's too late, I'm simply here to state, I've been living outside, I've been hearing your music, I've looked through your windows, I've heard all your creeds, I'm afraid you're dying but too proud to bleed, so I'm here to give you the gift you most need. Not a Torah or scriptures, of those you have plenty, no song, no sermon, no conjured emotion, or magical, practical, theological potion. I can't give you money, but for your own sake, my gift to you is what I can take. He paused for a moment, then with purpose he said, I'm here to siphon a sip of your love, the thing you've been choking on an ocean of. You've breathed out his love and his goodness and mercy. Your lungs are so full from your drag and your pull. You're holding your breath like it's a great treasure, but when you don't share it, it loses its pleasure. So I need what you have, it's blatantly true. But it's also apparent. You need me too. I come to you desperate, needing his love, and if I can't gulp it, I'll fall from this pulpit. But unless you exhale it, you too will die from too much of all that which makes you alive. So learn to breathe out his love on all people, or all this stagnation will topple your steeple. The gnome paused from his perch, listening for whispers, a hint of a pulse, a throb of the living, a twitch of a corpse. But all he could see in this shuttered museum that once was a church, now a mausoleum, were faces of frozen, no blinks, no breaths, just fatal corrosion. He tripped down the stairs. It seemed no one had heard him. He hobbled, eyes heavy, down the long aisle, parting the sea of cadaver-like faces, till she stepped from the corpses and silenced his paces. 'Twas a little girl who once had been scared of this odd little gnome who lived in a box in his own little world. 12 years old, courageous reserve, eye to eye, they stared for a while. She breathed in a breath that emptied the room and blew on the gnome a most fragrant perfume, for she hadn't yet learned how to hold her breath. And love came cascading and opened the tomb. He closed his eyes and received her affection, not food, not heat, yet he thawed and he ate, and he found resurrection. She reached for his hand, and together they floated through waters of sadness and wheezing religion, till they reached the shores where doors opened to a love that still breathes through little girls and old gnomes, in a land of religion where love finds a home. It was quiet for a beat. Pete wiped a trickle of blood from Jesus' arm and said, "Are you aiming to start a revolution of sorts? Because I'd love to join that kind of fight. I'm all over sticking it to the man." Jesus looked at Pete knowingly, wondering how much he had really grasped, and said, "Two things. First, I haven't asked you to join me yet." He smiled. "And secondly, yes, it is a revolution of sorts, but one that will feel quite foreign to you, Pete. It will break things with sacrifice rather than fists." James and John looked disappointed. Jesus turned and looked directly into Pete's eyes. "It will break you too, Peter. But in the breaking, you will be remade into a more beautiful version of yourself. The you that was originally intended. You will become a champion of justice and love and forgiveness. I have big plans for you." Nobody said anything. I couldn't believe Jesus was talking to him like this. "So here's the offer, Peter. If you'd be willing to walk away from everything you hold dear, put down your ink gun for a while, then I'd be honored to have you join my tribe. You've been drawing impressions on people's skin. I want you to decorate their hearts." Pete stared straight back in Jesus' eyes. I'm not sure who was reading whom, but I'm pretty sure I missed a whole conversation that transpired in 5 seconds of silence. Pete's face gradually bent into a smile. He picked Jesus up out of the chair as if he was a throw pillow and gave him a huge bear hug. "All right, teacher, I'm in. You better deliver." As he put Jesus down, Pete looked over at me and said, "How about the kid here? I think we need a doc on our team." I almost looked around to see if he was talking to someone else. Jesus turned to me, possibly weighing the cost-benefit of my involvement with the tribe, then said, "Kid, want to play on the A-team?" Oh God, he's talking to me. Shivers went up and down my whole body. I started stammering, trying to buy time, trying to think. I had two thoughts. The first, a tsunami of fear. Not a big surprise, since fear was quite often the first card I'd draw whenever anything remotely new or interesting confronted me. I'm not like Pete. I don't have confidence. I don't make decisions well. In fact, I generally waffle on decisions until something or someone makes them for me. Besides, why would Jesus want me on his team? I wouldn't pick me if I were captain of a team. Not that I've ever been one. But the second thought that came barging into my brain was, yes, hell yes, I would love to be on his team. Who talks the way he just did to people he doesn't know? Who is this man? This feels strangely big, significant, and yes, I do want to belong. I've never belonged to anything, let alone anyone. If I could suppress my fear long enough to let my heart actually make a decision, this would be an easy one to make. Come on, kid. John spoke to me for the first time. Considering his reputation as a fighter, he looked at me tenderly, like he knew the battle that was raging inside me. He knew I needed a pull, not a push. He continued, "Me and James, it's not like we were going to change the world with our music. Pete, he just made people bleed. You need to find out who you are before you'll ever be able to heal people." John reached his hand out to me in an offer. I didn't take it, still too scared. "Don't be afraid, Philip," said Jesus. "I know the real you. The you that you are becoming. I see you as brave, confident, fearless. I have big plans for you." I didn't know if I believed him, but I wanted to. Possibly for the first time in my life, I threw caution to the wind and joined the tribe of a guy named Jesus.